The day I actually needed someone, I went through every contact in my phone and realized I did not know who to call. Not because I had no one, but because I had spent so many years being the person people called that I had never once built the kind of relationship where I could be the one on the other end of that call. That realization did not arrive loudly. It arrived quietly, the way the most painful things usually do. Like something that had always been true finally deciding it was tired of being ignored. My name is Adrian, I am 30 now, and what I am about to tell you is something that took me a long time to understand, even longer to accept, and even longer than that to do anything about. I had been the dependable one my entire adult life. Not because someone asked me to be. Not because I sat down one day and decided that was the role I wanted. It just happened gradually, the way identities tend to form when you are young and paying attention to what earns you a place in people's lives. I was the friend who showed up. The one who remembered. The one who answered the phone at inconvenient hours and never made you feel like you were asking too much. It felt like strength. For a long time, it genuinely felt like strength. Looking back now I can see that some of it was strength. Real, genuine care for people I loved. But underneath that care was something else that I did not examine closely enough for years. A deep and quiet fear that if I stopped being useful, if I stopped being the one who gave the most, I would become someone people had no real reason to keep around. I built my relationships on that fear without ever knowing I was doing it. I was 27 when the year started that eventually broke the pattern open. I had a close circle of people I considered my real friends. There was Joel, who was 29, someone I had known since university and who had leaned on me through a painful divorce 2 years earlier. There was Cara, who was 26, a colleague turned close friend who called me almost weekly to process whatever was happening in her life. And there was my younger brother, Danny, who was 23, and who I had been quietly supporting through a difficult period with his mental health for the better part of a year. I loved all three of them. I want to be clear about that because this story is not about blame. It never has been, but I was giving enormous amounts of myself to each of them without anyone really knowing how much, because I never showed the seams. I was always steady, always composed, always the one with perspective and patience and time, and on the inside I was running on less and less with every passing month. Then my own life started falling apart in ways I was not prepared for. It started with my job. I worked at a project management firm and had been quietly struggling with a manager who had been dismissive of my work for months. Not openly hostile, just the kind of constant low-level undermining that makes you question your own competence slowly and thoroughly. I had mentioned it once to Cara in passing. She had sympathized briefly and then moved the conversation back to something she was dealing with. I had not brought it up again. Then my father got sick. Nothing immediately life-threatening, but serious enough that it required hospital visits and difficult conversations and the kind of sustained worry that lives in the back of your chest every hour of every day. I told Joel about it in a text. He replied with a short message saying he was sorry and that he hoped things improved. I did not hear from him again for 2 weeks. I kept showing up for everyone else during this time. I kept answering Cara's calls. I kept checking in with Danny. I kept being present for the people around me the way I always had. Partly because I genuinely cared, but partly because stopping felt impossible. Like if I withdrew even slightly, the roles would shift in ways I was not ready to navigate. And I kept waiting, without admitting to myself that I was waiting. Waiting for someone to notice the weight I was carrying. Waiting for someone to ask the real question. Waiting to be seen the way I tried to see everyone else. But then something happened that I could not organize my way around. About 4 months into all of this, I got sick myself. Not seriously. A viral infection that knocked me completely off my feet for almost a week. I was alone in my apartment, unable to go to work, barely able to make food for myself, and genuinely miserable in the particular way that physical illness makes everything feel worse than it already is. I waited for someone to reach out. I told myself I was not waiting, but I was. On the third day, I sent a short message to Joel, Cara, and Danny separately letting them know I was unwell and stuck at home. Joel replied the next morning with a brief get well message. Cara sent a string of sympathetic emojis. Danny did not reply for 2 days and then sent an audio message that was mostly about something he was going through. Nobody came. Nobody called. Nobody offered to drop something off or sit with me for an hour. And I lay there in my apartment, physically awful and now emotionally hollow in a way I had not expected, and I finally let myself look at the truth I had been avoiding. The relationships I had built were not balanced. They had never been balanced. And that was not entirely their fault. I had constructed these relationships in such a way that my needs were always invisible. I had trained the people around me to receive from me without the habit of giving back, because I had never once shown them that giving back was something I needed. I had made myself into a resource. And resources do not get checked on. They just get used until they run dry. I want to stop here and ask you something directly. Have you ever poured yourself into people and then felt furious at them for not pouring back, but also felt guilty for being furious because you never asked them to? That circular feeling, the resentment and the guilt sitting right next to each other, is one of the most disorienting things I have ever experienced. Because you cannot even fully claim the anger. You built the situation. You just did not realize that was what you were doing. The week I was sick was also the week I started being honest with myself about all of it. I recovered physically, but something in me had shifted and I could not shift it back. I started seeing the pattern not just in my current friendships but across my whole life. The way I had always moved into relationships leading with what I could offer. The way I had always found a quiet satisfaction in being needed that I had never interrogated closely enough. The way I had mistaken being indispensable for being loved. Those are not the same thing. I understand that clearly now. But when you have spent years confusing them, entangling one from the other takes time and honesty and a willingness to sit with some uncomfortable realizations about yourself. What happened next surprised me and changed the direction of everything. A few weeks after I recovered, I had a conversation with Joel that I had not planned. We were talking about something unrelated and he said something offhand about always knowing I was fine because I never seemed to struggle with anything. And instead of letting that pass the way I always had, I said something honest. I told him that I struggled with things all the time, that I had been struggling for months, and that I had not said anything because I had never felt like that was a space available to me in our friendship. He went quiet for a moment, and then he said he had no idea, that he had assumed because I never showed anything that there was nothing to show, and that if he had known he would have shown up differently. That conversation did not fix everything, but it cracked something open between us that had not been open before. It introduced a new possibility into our friendship, the possibility that I was also a person who sometimes needed things and that asking for them was allowed. I had similar, slower conversations with Cara and Danny over the following months. Not confrontational ones, just more honest ones. I started letting people see more of what I was carrying, not as a performance of vulnerability, but as a genuine shifting of how I showed up. I stopped editing myself down to the parts that were easiest to be around. I started saying when I was tired, when I was struggling, when I needed something. The responses were not uniform. Cara became more reciprocal in ways I had not expected. Joel and I grew genuinely closer in the months that followed that first honest conversation. Danny, to his credit, started checking in on me in small ways that were new for him and clearly an effort. I also had to let go of some of my own expectations. I had to accept that some people in my life were simply not built to give the way I gave, and that choosing to stay in those relationships meant adjusting what I looked to them for. That was not a failure. It was just clarity. And clarity, even when it is uncomfortable, is always more useful than the version of things you have been telling yourself to stay comfortable. I am 30 now and I still show up for people. That part of me has not changed because it was never the problem. The problem was the invisible terms I had attached to that showing up, the unspoken expectation of a reciprocity I had never made visible, the quiet suffering I performed as selflessness. Now I show up differently. I show up and I also ask. I give and I also receive. I am present for the people I love and I also tell them when I need them to be present for me. It sounds simple. It is not always simple, but it is honest in a way my relationships had never fully been before. If you are the person in your life who is always there for everyone, I want you to hear this. Being that person is not wrong. Caring deeply is not wrong. But you are allowed to need things too. You are allowed to say when you are running low. You are allowed to let the people you love actually love you back, which means letting them see when you need it. The people who are worth keeping will not think less of you for having needs. They will just finally be given the chance to show up in a way you never let them before. Leave a comment below and tell me if this story felt like yours in some way. Tell me if you have been the strong one for so long that needing something now feels almost foreign. Your honesty here matters and so do you. If this story reached something real in you, please share it. Someone in your life might be carrying exactly this and not know how to say it. Like this video and subscribe to Untold Perspectives for more stories that speak the things most people keep silent. You deserve to be shown up for. Not someday, now.